Now, if you follow the news closely, it's been more than a week since President Trump kicked off his new administration. Now, this time, a lot of uncertainties will be answered shortly. If we look at this first day agenda, that he signed more than 200 executive orders and also the promises to the nation from curing this illegal battle against illegal immigrants, and also this economic trade against any other countries. Again, keep in mind that President Trump is a very simple and the same model that he had back in 2016, which is make America great again. When we look at what's happening in America today, we also need to understand what's happening at the front line. Now, recently, the current president of Ukraine that actually got on X, formerly known as the social media Twitter. Now, tweeted something regarding one of the most well-known and also one of the critical countries in Southeast Asia, which is Vietnam. Now, this time, according to the information from President Zelensky, now the nation of Vietnam actually built a rather meaningful and also economic relationship with Ukraine at this moment. How do we understand that? And also putting forward, since Vietnam has been the center of Southeast Asia under President Trump, are we going to see a better relationship? But meanwhile, we still don't know whether China and Vietnam will get along this year. China and US will get along this year. Well, that's why in this episode, we're going to answer all the questions. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor to invite our distinguished speaker, who is Dr. Hong Nguyen. And Dr. Hai is currently a senior lecturer of politics and social change and international relations in the College of Arts and Science and VinUniversity in Vietnam. And also, he's a Fulbright scholar at American University. He's well known for his publication in international affairs and especially regarding the position of Vietnam and how Vietnam is continuing to make waves around the world. Well, Dr. Hai, and welcome back to The Missing Piece.
My pleasure, Will.
Well, again, Dr. Hai, as I mentioned before, now, there's no surprise that we're still seeing the war in Ukraine at this moment. But as I mentioned in the intro, current president of Ukraine, Zelensky, that actually took on his message on the social media X. Now, this is what he tweeted, and I only want to read a portion of the message to you, and I quote, "I held a meeting with the Prime Minister of Vietnam, during which we discussed the further development of trade and strengthening economic cooperation. Overall, all these years, trade between our states have been growing, and I'm glad that we have such strong economic ties. Ukraine is ready to continue increasing the supply of agricultural product to Vietnam." Now, Dr. Hai, at this moment, one thing we understand that Vietnam stands at the critical moments in Southeast Asia, and especially, we discussed last year. But meanwhile, by seeing this message from President Zelensky, what do we make of that? And also, how do we know that this relationship between Vietnam and Ukraine, it's more than just what we call the agricultural trade relationship. It's something much deeper. Your thoughts?
Thank you, Will. I think this is a very interesting question to everyone. And of course, it is a surprise to many other observers with regards to Vietnam and Ukraine's relationships, more particularly and broadly, Vietnam position and stance on the war between Russia and Ukraine in general. Which started in 2022. I think if we look at the relationship between Vietnam and Russia and Vietnam and Ukraine, I think we should also refer to Vietnam relationship with the Soviet Union in general. So back in the Soviet Union era, both Russia and Ukraine are parts of the Soviet Union. And so when Vietnam talk about Vietnam's relationship with Soviet Union, that means Vietnam's relationship with both Russia and Ukraine, right? So if I just want to draw attention of our audience to the fact that in the meetings between the Vietnamese leaders and both Russia and Ukraine, Vietnamese leader always mentioned that Vietnam in general
Mm.
is very thankful to the support and assistance from Soviet Union.
Mm.
That means Vietnam is thankful to the support and assistance from Russia and Ukraine. So many people confused because many people thought that when the when Vietnamese leaders mentions Soviet Union, that means they just meant Russia's only. But that's
Mm.
wrong, right? So
Mm.
as I mentioned before, Vietnam is very thankful and grateful to both Russia and Ukraine for their support and assistance during the national resistance liberation era. So, so in overall, Vietnam's relationship with Russia and Ukraine since the collapse of the Soviet Union um, has been very well.
Mm.
So it and when the war between Russia and Ukraine broke out about 2 years or 3 years ago, Vietnam's position and stance has been very clear.
Mm.
It doesn't take side with anyone um, because from my own interpretation is that because they are both good
Mm.
friends of Vietnam. So
Mm.
we can't say, well, we support Russia and we go against Ukraine or vice versa. So because, as I said, and I emphasize, they are both good friends of Vietnam. And
Mm.
remember, when Vietnam have a comprehensive strategic partnership with Russia, but on the other hand, Vietnam has a comprehensive cooperative partnership with Ukraine.
Mm.
So Vietnam trying to maintain neutral between Russia and Ukraine. And I think this position and this stance has been repeated by Vietnam representative at the UN and Vietnamese leaders in many occasions.
Mm.
And Vietnamese Prime Minister once already made it clear that Vietnam doesn't take side, and Vietnam's respect international law and respect the principle of non-interference in internal affairs, not use of force or threat use of force in international affairs. So I
Mm.
think that's a very clear message, that a very clear position and stance. And that's why I think so far Vietnam is the only country in Southeast Asia, from my knowledge, that has been in contact with Ukraine because Vietnam doesn't see any hinder um, in the relationship between Vietnam and Ukraine. And Vietnamese leaders, in many occasions, um, have met Ukrainian President Zelensky in different occasions. Now, back in September in New York, uh, uh, Secretary General of the Communist Party of Vietnam, come President Tô Lâm, also had a meeting and talk with Ukraine President Zelensky. Now, in Davos, as you mentioned, Will, the Prime Minister also had a meeting with Ukraine President Zelensky again.
Mm.
And after that, of course, the Zelensky twisted the status that you have read out for the sake of our audience. So I think Vietnam and Ukraine, in some way, in one or another way, still maintains a close relationship. And I don't know how deep it is, and something else beyond the tweets by Ukrainian President Zelensky. But I'm sure that, and I can say that Vietnam's relationship with Ukraine is still going well, and Vietnam's and Ukraine, I think, is determined to maintain their relationship. And because Ukraine still has the needs,
Mm.
particularly, the demand for assistance, for collaborations to restore their countries, particularly after the war between Ukraine and Russia.
Dr. Hai, as we're looking at the war, again, as you mentioned before, more than 3 years or even more than 1,000 days, the whole world continues to pay attention to the war. On one hand, it's rather devastating. And on the other hand, I guess the word we used before, which is uncertainty. Now, from your perspective, we know this month of the year, Vietnam is quite busy because the whole nation is getting ready to welcome the Lunar New Year, and which is one other celebration for the nation. But meanwhile, Dr. Hai, from your perspective, how do we understand the current economic situation in the nation of Vietnam? I mean, again, going back to the tweet that from President Zelensky, that this economic partnership between Vietnam and Ukraine should not be underestimated. But also, I want to bring U.S. into our conversation as well. I'm sure that Dr. Hai, you're familiar with the name called Marco Rubio, and who is newly nominated and also got confirmed as the Secretary of the State. Now, just coincidentally, that he also tweeted something about America's interest. This is what he said. Now, I'm grateful to POTUS for the confidence that he has placed in me to serve as Secretary of the State. And then he said, it's every policy that we must understand. Does it make Americans safer? Does it make Americans stronger? Or does it make America more prosperous? So, from your perspective, Dr. Hai, on one hand, we're looking at this mutual interest between between Ukraine and Vietnam. But meanwhile, we're looking at this message from the West. How do we balance that? So let's start from the first question. What is the general economic situation in Vietnam today? And number two, how do you think Vietnam can balance the relationship? We are seeing the new cabinet members, and also we are seeing the relationship with Ukraine. What do you say to that?
Well, I think Vietnam's economy, I think at the moment is still in a well positions to develop. As everyone knows, in 2024, Vietnam's economic growth rate achieved more than 7%. And just a few days ago, Vietnam's Communist Party held a plenary, and they set the goal for 8% of economic growth in 2025, and even beyond 2025, the Vietnamese Communist Party also set a goal for double digit in economic growth. So I think Vietnam's ambitious economic growth rate goal is set within a broader pictures of development of Vietnam by 2030, and far more beyond in 2045. So I think I can understand the ambitious economic growth rate goal set by the Communist Party of Vietnam, because in order to achieve the goal within a very short times now, 2025 and 2030, just only 5 years more, right? And by 2030, Vietnam's Communist Party set the goal for Vietnam to become a developing country with high income. At the moment, it's a lower middle income country, but Vietnam is ambitious to become a developing and middle incomes with high income by 2023, and by 2045 it becomes a developed countries with high income. So it is a very ambitious goal. Now look at the time frame between now and 2030 and 2045. It's not long,
Mm.
actually. And more particularly, the world, you know, everyone can see is, experiencing a very complicated, in some very challenging times, more particularly in the context of increasing the power rivalry between China and the United States. So I think Vietnam's Communist Party has the reason to set out such a very ambitious economic growth. So we hope, because we don't know, everything is not, unfolded yet.
Mm.
Particularly in the United States, they just have a new administration. Trump's return to the White House with the American First policy, and as you have read, three key points of America's foreign policy: um, safer, stronger, and uh, more beneficial for the United States. So I can understand. Um, yes, so I think the at the moment the economic outlook for Vietnam is very promising.
Mm.
Um, now, um, coming to the second question with regards to Vietnam's balanced relationship between the West and also Vietnam's stance on Ukraine, I think, as I said, you know, um, I think Vietnam's stand is very neutral, and Vietnam is willing to play more important in, um, the reconstructions of Ukraine after the war. And I think based on the good relationship between Vietnam and Ukraine, I think Vietnam has a firm stance in the reconstruction and the rebuildings of Ukraine after the war. And of course, I understand, and I might be wrong, but my forecast is that the war between Ukraine and Russia, might not going further this year. In other words, they might stop the
Mm.
war, because I can understand Russia's economy is getting worse and worse,
Mm.
and Vladimir Putin understands that. And if the war prolonged, then it will be a disaster for Russia. In fact, Russia's economy is already devastated because of the
Mm.
war. So
Mm.
I think, yeah, Vietnam's would have great positions in the restorations and the reconstructions of Ukraine after the war, and Vietnam will, of course, I think, will take a very good position into that process.
Mm.
Now, and I think that also a you know, a very good position for Vietnam. More particularly, I think is also, it should be welcomed by the West, by the United States, and I think the United States and the West in general, understand well the Vietnam position, and I think more or less. They understand Vietnam position, they understand Vietnam stance, and they welcome Vietnam contributions to Ukraine's reconstructions of the country. Um, and I think somehow it allies with the West and the United States support and assistance to Ukraine in terms of not supporting Russia's wars in Ukraine, and Vietnam's neutral position and stance.
Mm.
Now, with regards to Vietnam's relationship with the new administration in the United States, I think the two countries established comprehensive strategic partnership in 2023 by President Joe Biden
Mm.
and Vietnamese Communist Party Secretary General Nguyễn Phú Trọng back in 2023. And now for me, the 3 points in the tweets or published by recently confirmed Secretary Marco Rubio, based on President Trump's American First policy. Now, for me, I think it's not new because now and now, if I can put a footnote here, for many people and most people wrongly understood President Trump's American First policy. I think he's right, and the world is wrong about his policy, because if you ask any leaders in the world today, what would you serve? Who would you serve? Right? So everyone will answer, well, I serve my people, I serve my country.
That's
So I
right.
think Trump is wrong. Trump is right, and the world is wrong about him. And we shouldn't elusive about that kind of policy. We must be very pragmatic. So I think so in my own views, I think that policy is not new. It's just something that Trump's spell out in a more very frank way, in a very pragmatic way. That's something people don't expect or don't want to listen, right? But overall, I think the United States or whoever or whatever countries, they will put their national interest first. American first, in other words, is national interest first. In other words. So I think, Vietnam has a very good relationship with the United States. And now, just 2 days ago, Secretary Rubio had a telephone call with Vietnamese Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Ministers with Thanh, and the two sides confirms the relationship between the two countries. And I think I can see that, the relationship, not too optimistic, of course, it must be realistic, but I can see that Vietnam's relationship with the United States in 2025 and in the years to come, more particularly in the 4 years under the Trump administration. Well, we don't know, of course. As I said, it's not yet unfolded, but I can see, and I hope that the relationship between Vietnam and the United States still going well.
Dr. Hai, I want to wrap up our conversation by going back to another piece of article that came across this week. It talked about that under Trump, the new administration should see Vietnam as a trade partner, not as a target. Now, let's bring some numbers into our conversation. According to the article regarding the trade relationship, and it says Vietnam gained, and which I believe that 2024 gained 11% of the US market, and also now making up 15% of the total US imports, up from 4% in 2017. But meanwhile, again, as you mentioned before, that we're seeing this economic relationship between US and Vietnam. Now, some experts started to analyze that Vietnam's export by stages of production, from intermediates to consumer and capital goods. So basically, that Vietnam's import from North Asia are comparable to those from China. We know that China this year has not been, we'll say, one of the favorites of the US, regardless who's in the White House. So for this upcoming year, Dr. Hai, from your perspective, how do you think, again, the question could be redundant, but I still want to ask, how do you think that Vietnam is able to balance out this trade relationship with China and also with the US. So, in other words, as we mentioned before, Vietnam it's one of the strategic partners in Southeast Asia. And we cannot ignore the presence of China and also the Chinese economy. But meanwhile, we still want to know how Vietnam is able to solidify or strengthening this trilateral trades among the partners. Your final thoughts.
Well, I think, look, well, if we look at the data and the statistics, of course, there is a big imbalance um, in terms of the um, trilateral economics relationship. And everyone can see that Vietnam is suffering a very huge trade surplus with
Mm,
China. But on the other hand, Vietnam is enjoying a also a huge trade surplus with United States. I think Vietnam needs to balance, of course. Um, and with China, I think Vietnam need to find a better way, apart from agriculture products to Chinese market. I think Vietnam need to find a better way in order to balance the trades. And of course, Vietnam need also to uh, request Chinese or government to open its market
mm,
to more Vietnamese products.
mm,
Because my understanding so far is that China is only um, you know um, have a very limited open to Vietnamese products, and
mm,
they only limit Vietnam export, agricultural exports to China's market only. And I think that's, and it seems they intend to do so. So I think it's unfair. So Vietnam, I think, should find a better way.
mm,
So even Vietnam need to, encourage more investment in China, for instance, and of course they need to open and welcome Vietnam's investment or export of other products to Chinese market. So that's one way in order to bring down the trade surplus between the two countries. Now, on the economic relationship between Vietnam and United States, I agree with the comments that Vietnam should be considered as a partners rather than a target.
mm,
Because now President Trump or the Trump administration should look at Vietnam and Vietnam economy as a huge, potential partners and market for United States export to Vietnam's. Vietnam's, as I said, Vietnam set a very ambitious goal
mm,
to become a digital economy or digitalized economy, and they set the goal to um, uh, development by 2023 and focusing on digital transformation, green technology, etc. And those are the areas that United States, is spearheading, and I think that's a way that the United States can bring down at the moment the imbalance in terms of and Vietnam is willing to open its market. Vietnam is willing to to import more, technologies
mm,
and product from the United States. Now, just recently, Vietjet is one of a private um, airlines in Vietnam's sign more deals to import airplane from the United States.
mm,
And they're willing to import more because Vietnam has the plant ambitious plan to expand its air fleet, and that's why Vietnam is willing to import more airplanes from the United States, and again technology, high technologies, and many other American products. So I think, yeah, if the United States, if Trump administration look at Vietnam as a very huge potential market in that kind of areas, then I think and Vietnam is still a developing country. There's still a huge potential for the United States company to do businesses in Vietnam. And so, yeah, I completely agree with the article or the comments that Vietnam should be considered as a trade partners rather than a target. Because and I should put a footnote here that Vietnam is not, of course, a competitor
Mm,
to by own means to the United States. So Vietnam is unlike China, right? And unlike other countries, Vietnam is developing country, and Vietnam's considered the United States as a strategic partners, and Vietnam emphasize the relationship between the two countries as a strategic priority. So yeah, I think yeah, Vietnam and United States should look at Vietnam in that way. Should
mm,
look at Vietnam as a partner rather than a competitor.
mm. Well, again, Dr. Hai, I agree with you 100%. Right now, we're seeing this uncertainty in the global supply chain, and also we're seeing a lot of uncertainty within the Trump administration. Regardless how President Zelensky seeing Vietnam, how President Trump able to treat Vietnam, but at the end of the day, as you mentioned before, it's one thing that we need to wake up to the reality that global supply chain demands cooperation, demands effective collaboration. And I hope that in 2025, again, this is only the beginning, that we're able to see a good start as Vietnam, this country, getting ready to celebrate the Lunar New Year. We hope that more blessings will continue to shower upon Vietnam and also for this global relationship. Well, again, ladies and gentlemen, it's such an honor to speak to Dr. Hong Nguyen. Again, Dr. Hai is a Fulbright scholar at American University, and also he's amazing lecturer of politics, social change, and international relations across the field. Well, Dr. Hai, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure, and we'd love to have you back on the show as we continue to discover this economic relationship between Vietnam and the US. And furthermore, we'd love to have more dialogues on the global international stage. So thank you so much for doing this.